dressed to match my slide. I didn't realise. It's good, isn't it? Keynote is underrated, actually. I think most of the Apple software for document editing is subpar. Keynote is excellent. Okay, cool. I don't know quite a lot of you in the audience, but I'm Baz. Hey, protected head. I'm the CEO of Tonk. Tonk we describe as a trust infrastructure startup. And our aim is to build software that makes it possible for you to build trust with anyone about anything on the web by replacing the legacy web platforms with what we call the web of proofs. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here in Brussels is because in the last few weeks, in pursuit of that, we've been developing a tool called Speakeasy, which is a social author tool to help communities grow. And it does this by filtering strangers into private wikis based on very, very particular shared attributes they can prove about themselves, about their digital footprint on the web. And we think it's exciting because it brings people together, not based on who they know, but what they've done. And if you can theoretically imagine like a Charlie XCX fan group, or a gaming guild, and I'll show you an example in just a sec, or a working cooperative, we think these spaces are going to be uniquely scalable because they mix the coziness you would get from a family group chat. We have a lot of common context with the fact you're actually operating with strangers you wouldn't be able to meet otherwise online or offline. What does this look like? I'm starting with what we actually built recently rather than going into the whole big one and whatever, because it helps us ground things a little bit. But it looks like this. This is a really, really simple example. It's just an auth flow and this private wiki. And this is an example from our design partner, Waz, which is an on-chain gaming guild. So you get into this space not because you've got the right invite from the right person, but because you can demonstrate certain things that you've done about yourself. And we think this is, apart from the social pattern of an airdrop, this is a new thing which I don't think has been replicated elsewhere on the web and approximates this vision that Arno outlined at the start of the day, which is about creating a new kind of space on the web with new sorts of affordances. Today I'm going to talk about what scares me about the internet, why I think there's a big opportunity here. I'm going to introduce an opinionated metric for how to measure proof scaling that I haven't heard other people talk about, but I think it's pretty cool. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Speakeasy and how we came up with the idea and how it was implemented and what's next for that. I was on a run where I live in Hackney the other day, and this moment hit me like a saw on the road to Damascus moment. That there's like a particular way to frame the challenges I see on the internet that strike me as an accurate articulation of what I care about. And it's these two things. There's this scaling problem, which is that the internet is growing, and assuming that it's going to grow more and more over the next 50 years, in 2074, what kind of infrastructure do we need to have a stable foundations to reliably support an economy that's vastly bigger than the one we have today? And parallel to this, for the developmental economics geeks in the room, we have like an HDI metric equivalent, which is when that does happen, how are we going to guarantee the continued humane treatment of people who live on the internet? And the reason I'm concerned about this is because the dominant socio-economic model by which the internet has scaled over the last 15 to 17 years has proven itself to be very, very powerful, but very, very dangerous as well. And it's this little thing that all founders know and love called network effects. Network effects, the simple trait of a system whereby the more people get added to the system, the more valuable it becomes to each new member. When they're privatized, they grow networks, and we all know and love this because they go through a very similar cycle, which we talked about already today, where it starts out where things are kind of cool, they're very innovative, the company strives to create value for its users. Over time, it becomes so powerful and so cool that you kind of can't leave it just by virtue of the network being the nature of what it is. And it's at that point that platforms are compelled, if it's a private network, to extract value rather than continue to innovate. And that's why things like Twitter are so very hard to leave, even though you may disagree with what the CEO is tweeting about. And that's why the platform is impose like exorbitant creator rents, and there's not really much you can do. And that's why, if you're a creator building on TikTok and you get a shadow banned, you don't necessarily even know it's happened. And it's not really up to you. You're kind of powerless against this tool. And this makes things both unreliable and user hostile as well. And it's not to do with like evil big tech core. Like, people tend to be intelligent and nice. It's just the incentive structures that we've built around ourselves. And hitting the upper limit of how they scale, using this thing like, that I think enshittification is the academic term. I'm missing this slide. That's okay. Imagine a slide where on the left side of the slide, you've got a list of the hypertext transfer protocol, the SMTP behind email, the domain name system, PKI, all these things that originally grew the web in the 90s, and over on the left side we've got all this new generation of web infrastructure we all rely on today, which is just as fundamental as all that stuff, but it's things like social graphs and AI agents and moderation algorithms. What we notice about these original 90s style infrastructure is that they are very, very reliable insofar as they're incredibly neutral, insofar as this enshittification is impossible as baked into the incentive structures that make it happen, because there is no HTTP corporation that can start to extract value. Whereas on the left side, when the social graph is owned and operated by a corporation, you run into this problem which has like certain reliability problems. And I'm not against corporations, but I am in favour of scalability and how we can make the biggest possible economies. And to borrow a phrase from Chris Dixon, how we make things grow more like New York City and less like Disneyland. Thankfully, we have a bunch of new superpowers to make this possible, and the great thing about being at ETC is that blockchain has sponsored the development of so many of these other technologies. Whether it's zero knowledge proofs as a way to express authoritatively facts about yourself without relying on someone else to give you a tick, or oblivious compute, the ability for some computer to execute some program on some data without necessarily having to see what that data is, or to, a big focus for topology has been local first software. All these things that are kind of decentralization adjacent, I refer to as advanced disintermediation technologies, because they help us disintermediate these platforms in lots of different powerful ways, which ultimately will make things into what you can think of as a web of proofs, which will be cheaper, more private, more reliable, and ultimately more scalable for the businesses that are building on top of them, and more humane because of the incentive structures that we built into them. They put users at the center of the experience. Is the theory. When we think about the way in which proving technology is scaling, and the reason I asked this question at the start of the day to Jeremy, the Risk Zero CEO, how do you think about scaling? It's because it's really nice when you're building something, if you've got something like Moore's Law that you can be relying against, some kind of exponential growth. And when we talk about proving, one thing that's been floated by Waydive and 1KX is this notion of kappa, which is a way to think about how proofs scale. And kappa is a way to measure the overhead of verifying a piece of compute relative to the original cost of that compute. And kappa's like getting way better, and that's really exciting. I want to propose another alternative metric that I call expressive bandwidth. Now, I couldn't find a slide for this, so this is me drawing in GoodNotes on my iPad. This is my attempt to visually represent my, Baz's digital footprint on the web. And you can imagine this as a map of all the stuff I do in social media, and on Venmo, and by email, and up in RuneScape, and whatever. You can think of expressive bandwidth as the quantity of attestations you are able to make yourself about your activity in this digital footprint. Or you could think about it as the percentage of your total digital footprint that you are able to make attestations about. And so, for example, thanks to things like blockchain, which is this open queryable database you can think of in that metaphor, you can kind of think of it like an open queryable database. You can prove that you've done certain things in Ethereum or in Starknet and then settle down to Ethereum, and that enables new industries that are basically disintermediated and all the nice things we talked about. But thanks to genius teams like the ZK email team, you can now increase the expression space, or the expressive bandwidth of what you can attest to with whatever exists within the context of an email you got from someone. And then it takes great teams like the ZK P2P team to realize that if you can prove that you have an email from Venmo saying that you did send some money somewhere, then you can use that proof on chain to unlock an escrow account and essentially do peer-to-peer onboarding, completely bypassing any centralized exchange. And that is massive. And hopefully one of the reasons it feels massive to me is because you can extend this pattern throughout the entire rest of the web and see what will happen if you can start to, if users can attest to the full richness of their digital footprint without relying on external platforms from which they operated or did certain things at certain times. And I'll get into some examples of what this could manifest in different sorts of applications. One of the reasons I'm so confident about this process of infecting that graph with green, is something which reminds me of something Jeff Bezos said about the early internet in the early 90s. And the reason Jeff Bezos quit working at hedge fund I think he was at, was because he saw a stat in a magazine about the number of new internet addresses that were coming online, like per month, and it was astronomical. And what he realized this would lead to would be, as the number of internet addresses would grow, this would lead to new demand for applications and new things like blogging and social networking, early social networking and e-commerce, which in turn would sponsor all sorts of development into increasing the number of internet addresses coming online. And I think we see a similar flywheel effect with this new web of proofs, which is that as the number of attestations we're able to make as we increase our expressive bandwidth increases, this leads to new sorts of applications, and so on and so on. And it's like a very, very simple flywheel. And this is going to happen. Like, to me, I would love to find someone who can convince me that this is not going to happen, because to me this feels very, very inevitable. And we've seen it happen. We're not like, we're in like maybe phase 3 or phase 4 of this cycle. So it kind of started out that, Guilty's smiling over there in the corner, it kind of started out that you could do something in the Cairo VM, and then you got this idea of an application called a ZK rollup. And then that sponsored all sorts of development we heard about earlier, where you can now verify anything inside a RISC-V VM, and now you have ZK rollups as a service. And now you can verify anything over email, and you have things like better onboarding with ZK P2P. And thanks to the power of primitives under development at the Ethereum Foundation's PSE group, things like TLS Notary, you can, in theory, make attestations about anything that happens over a web connection. And you can, and the hypothesis behind Tonk and behind, I think, most of the projects in this room is that this opens up the application space in really powerful new ways. And we heard about Rare Remote as an example of that. We heard, yesterday I was having lunch with David, and we kind of came up with this idea for like a better Uber that you could bootstrap off Uber's data, which I think is kind of a nice illustration, which I'll get into later. Mohammed, who's somewhere around, has got a plan to disrupt the entire global system of letters of credit and global shipping by just making attestations that you sent a certain thing at a certain time. And this disintermediary effect, again, push us towards the web of proofs. So that's like the first 2 bits of my talk. The third bit, which is kind of the meat of what Tonk has been focusing on, and those of you who know me will know that this is something that we spent quite a lot of time talking about, is that this process I'm describing about web of proofs has already been modeled, like in its entirety, in this tiny petri dish subculture within crypto called the Autonomous Worlds ecosystem. And if you haven't come across Autonomous Worlds, the basic idea is that you can create worlds that are owned and controlled by either no one or the people that live inside that world, rather than some external actor or company or platform. And an example of what this could mean would be that you could have a game world which isn't controlled by a company, but is rather stored on something like a blockchain and therefore has autonomy. So it's fully queryable and composable. And what you're looking at here is a game called Primordium, which exists fully on chain and is openly queryable. Mohammed, you missed the shout out to. So one of the things that's really nice for scalability and reliability and emergent social behaviors that you get in an autonomous world is that you theoretically create the world's most scalable gaming guild. So those of you who, as I'm sure many of you were, studying the history of gaming guilds last night before you went to bed, will remember that gaming guilds are a really hard thing to scale. And one of the reasons they're hard to scale is because, two reasons really. The first is that it's hard to get people to demonstrate that they're going to do certain things for the guild without incorporating some kind of legal corporation that has to hire people and you make a company that does stuff. And the other reason it's hard to scale is because at any moment in time, if you've built up an entire meta-social organization on top of some world, the world runner, the world creator can rug you at any time. And a little bit analogous to how Facebook and Zynga got into so much trouble after Farmville became almost too successful on top of Facebook's social graph. But the thing about blockchains is that not only can they diminish the platform risk, but they also sources of credible commitments about what you might do on chain, like attacking a certain planet in Primordium, or paying into the guild's treasury, or whatever you like. And so there's this thing called WASD, which was made by this guy called Faultproof Ben, who used to work at Bankless, who lives in California, and Ben made this thing called WASD, which is a gaming guild, which he wants to scale into almost like a network state, like a nation state that can be absolutely vast and have all these different people playing games and cooperating and coordinating together. And one of the things that's so scalable about WASD is they can interact with the worlds that they live on, but they don't need to rely on any one person permitting them to live there. So this brings us to May 2024. Some of you will recognise this as the Autonomous Anonymous Hackathon this year in Lisbon, which was a coming together of some of the most ambitious on-chain game hackers and developers, where we all built on top of each other's games and saw what sorts of things we could hack together. And to give you a little bit of context about Tonk's story, we really did a lot of work in applied cryptography for baking hidden information into games and autonomous worlds. And what we knew was that, number one, hidden information is a core part of game mechanics that we've taken for granted in traditional game development, but it's really hard to do on a blockchain unless you are a cryptographer, in which case you can do all sorts of clever cryptographic hacks to bake hidden information, whether that's like shuffling a deck of cards or a fog of war in some strategy game into a world. And what we realized is that most game developers are not cryptographers, so wouldn't it be nice for them if they had a nice SDK that would enable you to bake in kind of like componentized hidden information, to use like a short description. And we built it, and we called it Greeby. And Greeby you can think of as an SDK for hidden information in your game. It's out there on GitHub. And so we're there. That's myself and my co-founder Goblin Oates. And we're there in Lisbon, and we're working with different teams who are incorporating Greeby into their game, which comes with all this these systems for integrating with different chains. And what we anticipated, this is the classic founder thing that happened, is that we'd turn up there and we would validate whether or not there was demand for hidden information from game developers. And what we didn't anticipate was that while there was demand from game developers, there was a really specific use case, which wasn't to bake hidden information into the worlds of these games, but actually to bake it into the social layer above the games. Because we got chatting with this guy, Fault-Proof Ben, and Ben was telling us that he has this problem to do with WAS. So to give you some context, here's Primodium, here's the WAS gaming guild, there's like 100 people in it, and here's another rival gaming guild called Auden GG. And the thing, these two guilds have a very different approach to how they scale guilds. So Auden is basically, they're six buddies, they're really elite, they hang out, and they're really, really good at screwing up WAS plans. And WAS is supposed to be like this big thing that anyone can join and is open and is scalable, but the problem is that when you make something open and scalable, and hopefully some of you will pick up if you're listening to Arno's talks and common themes here, when you make things open and scalable, then anyone can come in. And so Ben had this problem, which was that any time he wanted to invade a certain planet or get everyone coordinating around a mission, Auden would always be there, like ready to stop them, because they were lurking in WAS's Discord. So they were just there hanging out as spies. And so Ben said to us, he said, I need hidden information, I need some kind of private space, and it needs to be protected from the spies in WAS, in Auden. But the whole vision behind WAS is that it can grow, and I don't want this to turn into a situation where I'm just inviting my friends, because I want this to grow to 10,000 people, and I can't have 10,000 friends. I'd love to, but I can't. I didn't say that. And so we had this challenge, how do you create a social space on the web that can grow and have the openness the internet was built for, but also has integrity? And that's where we came up with Speakeasy, which, as I mentioned at the start, is a social author tool to help communities scale. And the basic idea is that it's a private wiki that you can enter into just based on things that you've done rather than on who you know. And what this means is that because it's based on things you've done, you get what's sometimes referred to as coziness, which is that you know a huge amount of common context with the people that are in the space with you. But at the same time, you don't get in based on who you know. You get this openness that was behind the original spirit of the web. And that means you have the vibes, but the vibes can scale. And that's one of the reasons we're excited about what Speakeasy could potentially become as a new type of social space on the web, given how early we are. So to show you what it looks like, you have this login page. This is from the live demo that's in production for WAS at the moment, where you can't get into the space. And then we do some authentication. And in this case, the authentication we do is we check that certain on-chain conditions are true. In the future, the idea is that you could check for many more things based on attestations of any kind using the advanced cryptography tools I was talking about. But in this case, we're just checking to see if certain on-chain conditions are true. And the idea here is that you would check to see, like, has this person attacked me? Like, has this person been associated with an Auden GG address? Because you want to keep out those spies. Now, for this prototype, for full transparency, we're literally just checking to see if they've got a hat that Ben just given them on the HAT protocol. So we're not achieving that that vision yet. But that's why Goblin Oats is not in Brussels and he's building in London right now, because we're building in the asteroid extension soon, TM. So then you get into the wiki. This is only available to people that pass the test. You can see things like people planning raids. You can see things like new members. You can see like emergency lines. And we have all these things like admins can add new pages, and it's kind of a bit like Notion, if that helps you illustrate it. We're using the word wiki as a metaphor. And you can't get in unless you pass certain tests. And to go back to the metaphor I was using before, this bridges this design trade-off that the web has always faced. You know, the web, when it started in the 90s, arguably was really around for two goals, and that was, the web would connect you with the world's information, and it would connect you with the world's people. And what happened is, as the web grew and everyone flooded into sort of spaces grew a lot, but the level of contextual richness went down, and then we retreated to these family WhatsApp groups. And the problem with these cozy spaces on the cozy web, like the family WhatsApp groups, or even like this room right here, is that it's not scalable. Like, it doesn't connect you with strangers. You kind of have to know who to know, or you kind of have to dress up your Twitter profile in just the right way, signaling just the right kind of things about you that you might be permitted entry. And so what we're proposing is that there might be a middle way between these two things. And the more we got thinking about this, the more we got thinking about how we see this pattern manifested in other spaces on the web, outside of crypto. So for example, a few of my friends work in the music industry, and one of the things they told me is that there are all these services that people who are in the music industry and also happen to hack make in their spare time, which are ways of scraping Spotify information so that you can like try and export your Spotify graph to show who you've been listening to without necessarily like having to integrate with the Spotify API, because it's not necessarily something they want to facilitate, especially without charging you some money. And so what you've got these really hacky tools that could be potentially useful to indie musicians who want to find a way to bootstrap their top 100 listeners, for example. Or, for example, a working cooperative, so one idea that we were floating around yesterday would be like, what if you were an Uber driver in your town or city, and you wanted to bootstrap a network of the 4.9 star rated Uber drivers, but not just like your friends who are Uber drivers, like you want at least 2,000 people on this network for like premier Uber, and you want to like somehow scrape the information from Uber in a tested way, and that's an example of what potential speakeasy could be used for. And I think, you know, Raramo, speaking with the founder this week, we think that there might be something in there as well. And so this is basically the attack vector for Tonk over the next few months, is to find like the right vertical and the right form factor where we think we might achieve some kind of market fit here. And there's a bunch of stuff to figure out, some of which I've mentioned. I'm concerned about TLS notaries' fragility. I'm concerned about finding a way to make a sustainable economic model. I'm concerned. You know what I'm excited about is the future commitments piece, because we don't have this yet. But the idea being that inside these wikis, you can lock up funds in escrow, because using the blockchain as a credible commitment machine, you can agree to coordinate on certain missions and certain actions, and actually generate economic activity inside these speakeasies to create a social graph which is like a ZK social graph, but not in the way that Farcaster is a decentralized social graph. More like a social graph of spaces rather than profiles. I'm actually going to skip this because I think we've talked about it a good amount today. And you know, trust infrastructure, why is it timely? It's timely because we have this emergent problem on the web of platform stagnation. We have all this new cryptography. We have all this data that's kind of sitting within silos. We hung out. It was really fun. These are the ideas I want to leave you with. The attestation application cycle. Have confidence. The expressive bandwidth increasing, and moving towards the web of proofs. And yeah, would love to know if anyone doesn't understand, vehemently disagrees, thinks we're going on the wrong path. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here with you all today. I think it's an exciting time to be on the web. Yeah.
For any questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had like a mock-up of what the UX looks like, say among the front-end community of 4.9 star rated Uber drivers.
It looks like this at the moment.
Right, but so how do I have to connect my Uber app to it, and then it will...
Is Gershon?
He's not here yet.
So for mobile apps, you can essentially reverse engineer the APIs of the mobile app. You're indistinguishable from like an actual user of that app. You can also just do it on the web, and there you just have a Chrome extension, and just loading up the web page allows you to make this attestation.
I don't know what form factor is going to be,
Yeah.
but I have faith that we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
It's quite a powerful form, so someone will.
I've got a purely practical question about Speakeasy. Are the reading access and the writing access separated? So can you make a wiki that everyone can read, but only verified people can write on, or is it currently just communities that are closed and you can't read them either if you're not eligible?
I'm not sure I completely understand. Could you give, so what was this read that we did?
It was a Speakeasy presentation, right?
Yeah.
Where you said people can write on the wiki and participate in the wiki
Yeah.
if they satisfy a number of requirements.
Yes.
Can anyone view the wiki currently in this prototype?
No. So the whole point is that we
So
need
it's a
to.
closed community.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
We need to create like a private space that's integrated. I mean, theoretically, you would be able to use the underlying, architectures to make anything readable and anything private, and not just private to the group as a whole, but also people within the group that fulfill certain traits. As you get elevated through the ranks of these guilds, you can see more stuff and you have more permissions to do more things. But again, you're not relying on a person to be like, yes, you can now do all this stuff. You just have to have done certain things. And that's why I make continual reference to that experience we all know and love, because the thing that feels most similar to is actually like a layer 2 airdrop, if that makes sense. It's like a social experience. I don't participate in many layer 2 airdrops, but when I saw this Ultram thing, where it's you have to have done certain things, and I was like, isn't this remarkable that you're bringing together people based on what they've done? No, this doesn't happen on the internet. It's like a new thing. The closest thing is like a subreddit, where you can bring people together based on interests. But we think that that's relatively weak, because being interested in a thing tells you much less about yourself, has much less contextual richness than a thing that you've done, or some Boolean combination of things that you have done over the past several years on the web.
I wanted to ask about these proofs come from somewhere, right? Like they must come from signing authorities or passports, like some signing authority of the country. Do we need these on-chain registries, and how do we? Just a signature is not enough, do we need infrastructure to, registries? Do we need on-chain registries that hold public keys of stuff? And to what extent do you think that's important for the vision?
I confess it's not something which I've thought in great detail about. I do think there are certain things that blockchains are really useful for, and registries is maybe one of those things. The point I'm really making here is that you could theoretically envision a version of Speakeasy that doesn't rely on blockchain at all, and you could imagine a version of Speakeasy that is very much enriched by integrations with blockchain. For example, the credible commitment machine aspect of blockchain.
Generally, if you're going to be sometimes creating these attestations is more burdensome than you want to impose on every interaction, on every login, right? So if you have a registry, you can just now make claims about attestations that you previously made, which is quite useful.
I'll tell you what I have thought about, which is a connected thought, which is how is this going to be represented as some kind of social graph? Where do the speakeasies live and where are they hosted, and how are they indexable, and how are we going to advertise inside of them? How are we going to do all this good stuff? And I suppose I can see various different ways that it works out. I think what would potentially be really powerful is a map of all the niche vibes in the world that I can search, I can index and search on, and see if I qualify to be entered into. Because the one thing that LLMs still can't do for me is they're really bad at telling me, when you come to Brussels, where's the cool neighborhood? Because LLMs aren't vibe sensitive, because there's no data on the web that's vibe rich. And so that's, maybe, I don't know, it'd be cool, but yeah, I guess that's where I'm at, the experimentation.
Thank you so much, Baz.